Hey guys, today we're going to cover something that very closely aligns with what I do with cars. In life, I think auto expenses is going to be one of the biggest, as well as like homes. And it's really important to be conscious about how you spend your money when it's large investments like cars and homes and other big dollar items. So there's a conscious choice that you have to make when you use a car. And depends on the purpose. Like, do you need it for work? Do you need it for, you want to go off-roading, or you want to go racing, or you want to just, go to cars and coffee? But there's different functions for different cars. And depending on how you enter and exit a purchase of a vehicle, it's going to determine how much money you have left over maybe for your next car. And this is a hobby that's not cheap. If you know how to get in and out of cars effectively and very affordably, the price of the car doesn't really become an issue anymore. And I'll prove to you how. I'll give you an example. This car right here is a 2016 BMW M3. I have been a huge BMW fanatic ever since 2005. Pretty much as soon as I could start driving, I've always really loved BMWs and what they stood for. And I feel like for the price that they are, they give you a really premium experience. So there's a lot of, quirks that you have to be careful with. And I think there's a lot of things to consider. So we're going to go through 4 things today. One is how to look at cars and their values based on usage. Number 2 is going to be what to stay away from and what to watch out for. And number 3 is common desirable specs and packages to consider if you are looking for the car. And 4 is going to be common issues that might happen during your ownership. And that could be types of like mechanical problems that you might want to look for. Number 1, how to look at cars and their values for specifically the F80, F82, and F83 generation, which is 2015 to 2018, I believe, or 2019 BMWs. So depending on how you use it, like if you're just going to be going to cars and coffee and you're not really into like racing and you're not really into competing at all, the wear and tear in your car is much less. So the way that you want to look at these cars is how much can I get in for the spec that I'm buying at the mileage that I'm entering at. So let's just say this, right? If you buy a car that's, let's just say a well-priced example, a 2016 BMW base M3. So there's multiple trims. There's the base M3, there's the competition, there's also the M3 CS, M4 CS as well as the M4 GTS. That's like the super track focus kind. And the M3 CS and the GTS are limited edition examples. And they are both more like track focused. And the CS seems to be like the sweet Goldilocks version of the range because it's got the best amount of power and it's lightweight. And based on suspension tuning, it's kind of like the best mix of all worlds. It's performance oriented, it's comfortable, very livable, and great value for what they offer. But these cars are holding very, very strong in value. I'm gonna give you an example. So let's just say you buy a base 2016 M3 and you get it at 50,000 miles and you paid, let's just say $45,000. If you are intending to drive, let's just say 10,000 miles a year, you can factor that in based off of what I can get out of the car for at that miles. So typically what you want to do is, let's just say you intend to hold it for 1 year. So then you can actually look at 2015 examples with 60,000 miles. Maybe you just like to get in and out of cars. Intend to drive at 10,000 miles, I'm going to hold it for 1 year. So you can look at a 1 year older car with a similar spec, similar miles, at 60,000, and then see what they are moving at on auction. So you can use sites like Bring a Trailer, Cars and Bids, and you can kind of look at sales data, like what are they listing for on Facebook Marketplace? What are they selling for on Auto Trader? What are dealers asking for them? Very much so, the specs are very important when it comes to looking at these cars because you can't really look at like a 70K MSRP car versus like a 100K MSRP car, even though it's the same year and model. So all of that factors into your resale ability for how you're going to exit that car. Based on how you're using it, let's just say if you're already intending to use it just for the cars and coffee, that's how I would look at it. Based on the spec, and some of the more important ones are like executive package and technology package, as well as like the lighting package. Those are the ones that people typically desire if you're not really going to be competing with, other cars on the track. Those are things that are creature comforts that people like. as well as like the options for like ceramic brakes and stuff like that. That's what people typically will consider just for street driving. They don't really get ceramic brakes for competition. Now, if you're going to be using it for a different purpose, you don't always have to get a street spec or desirable street spec to convert to a track car. So what I mean is that like you can adjust for the price if you're going to be using, and the options if you're going to be using it for, let's just say, autocross or track. What that means is if you're going to be going to track days with it, maybe you don't want the carbon ceramic brakes, maybe you just want the iron brakes. That's okay. The price on that needs to adjust though. So let's just say a carbon ceramic brake car is at 45,000. Now a steel brake car, maybe you can get in at 41 or 42,000 with the same miles and similar specs other than the CCBs. That way you don't have to convert things back and forth, like from ceramic brake to iron brakes for the track day. You can just use the factory Brembo iron brakes and just upgrade the pads and the rotors. So there's never a wrong car to buy. I would say like some people, they just like certain options. For example, like the lack of electronic recline, that's fine. You know, you just need to account for that in the price difference when you enter in. Some people like DCT over manual, but typically manuals demand a premium over DCT. Some cars don't have an option. Some cars like the CS, they only come with DCT. Same with the GTS, they only come with DCT. So if that's the case, then it doesn't really matter with value because you only got one option. But if you're looking at like an M3 or M4 competition or a base, you do have both options and that will definitely affect the value. So typically a 6-speed manual will be worth more by a few thousand, maybe $3,000 to $4,000 more than a DCT example. But if it's something where it has everything else that you wanted, except for the transmission, it shouldn't be a deal breaker for you as long as the value is accounted for. Number 2, what to stay away from. The main things that you want to stay away from if you're going to be potentially like car hacking is going to be staying away from accident cars. Usually, Carfax is like the first line of defense. You can just run a Carfax report. I think it's like 40 bucks or something. Carfax is not perfect though, because people will go unreported and they'll fix their cars because they, you know, maybe they got in a fender bender and they didn't want it to be reported to Carfax, so they just took it to their own body shop. With these cars, you can use like a paint meter to find out if a panel has been repainted based on paint thickness. So paint meter, you can get those on Amazon for like 40, 50 bucks. And when you go to look at a car, check all the panels. And when you're checking panels, there's a way that you want to check too. So if you're looking at a specific part of the hood, you don't just test one part of the hood. You test multiple parts of the hood to make sure that it's all consistent throughout. Same with the fender. Like let's just say if a factory paint, you know, is on the fender, then you're also going to look at not just like this section, but you're also going to look underneath, like towards the side skirts, just to make sure that if they blended the paint, that it's not just certain sections, because you could miss the spots that they did spot repair. Another point is if it has like color wrap, that's hard because you can't really look at imperfections. So I typically steer clear of anything that's wrapped. Unless they're willing to unwrap it at their cost, I pretty much will walk away completely. PPF will also cause misreadings on the paint meter. So you have to factor that in. A lot of these cars do have paint protection film. It's not the biggest deal. You do need to consider that that's going to read differently than like the rest of the car that might not be wrapped. So that's not exactly the worst thing, because at least with PPF, you can kind of see a little bit of how the condition is with the paint. It is not uncommon for people to respray a panel and the PPF over it so that you can't use a paint meter on it. So there are sections of the car that you can't paint meter. For example, if it's not metal, it's not going to work. So if you're looking at a bumper, that's plastic, so that's not gonna read anything on the paint meter. But like sections like doors, hoods, and roofs, if it's metal, then it will work. This one, like the side skirts, will not work. If it's like a plastic side skirt, then you know there's really no way for you to really determine that. But if it's a plastic panel like bumpers and stuff, I actually don't think it's the biggest deal if it was repainted, because people repaint bumpers all the time. If they repaint it because of rock chips or little scuffs or something like that, it's not really the biggest deal. Hopefully it's not on Carfax, because then people will think that it's been an accident. So if that's the case, then it does devalue the car. But if you did the repaint, at least you can maybe prove like, hey, I repainted the rear bumper or the front bumper because of, let's just say, rock chips. Then at least like I have all the invoices, I have all the proof, I have all the photos. It's not really as big of a concern anymore. But if it's purely from like a dealer and it's just a Carfax report, you don't have to steer clear of it completely, but I typically won't touch anything that has anything but perfectly clean Carfax. It pretty much gives buyers no reason to not consider your car because it's as good as it gets. So that's the biggest one, is accident cars. Two is, if you see a high mileage vehicle, it's not the biggest deal as long as you account for the price. So let's just say, like, if your budget for these cars is $35,000 and you're looking at a car that's 80,000 miles or 100,000 miles, it's fine if you're set on getting one and you have to get one. Just know that with those cars, it's harder to exit. So if you get something that's like 80, 90, or 100,000 miles and you're intending to drive it, let's just say 5 to 15,000 miles per year, that will affect your exit much more greatly, because with almost any mechanical cars, gaskets go bad, seals go bad, and things just need to get refreshed. Like ignition coils, spark plugs, all these things will eventually reach a point where most things need to be refreshed. And that mileage is typically around 75 to 90,000 miles. So if you're entering at that point, you need to budget that in to the ownership, and just know that there may be some bigger bills coming up, and it will be potentially a few $1,000s. It's not the end of the world, but it is an expense that you should be mindful of if you're only going to be holding the car for 1 year. Because if you're intending to hold it for 1 year, drive it with 10,000 miles, and then you're going to get hit with all these maintenance items, it's going to hit you pretty hard when it comes time to exit, because that does affect your bottom line. Abused cars. So abused cars and bad specs. I've seen some cars that's like Phoenix yellow exterior with like a red interior. Like that's like a McDonald's car. Like those are awful, right? I've also seen like green cars with blue interiors. Like it's just, they clash. They're not complementary colors. The stitching's a completely different color than everything else in the car. Nothing ties in. You're usually going to see those cars almost always take a pretty decent hit on the resale market. But just know that when you actually sometimes spend more, you actually end up spending less. And what that means is, like, sure, you could get a Honda for 30 grand, like a Civic, or lease it for like $200 or $300 a month. But at the end of the day, if you're gonna be getting into like a used BMW or a used, Porsche or something like that, and let's just say it's not 30 grand, let's just say it's 70 grand or 80 grand. And you break down the mileage and the spec and the entry price that you bought in at, and you factor in your usage, then you could potentially come out on top versus like a $20,000, $30,000 Civic, brand new. So that's what I mean by sometimes when you spend more, you actually end up spending less, because upon exit, you will get paid back for your residual. You'll get paid back for the principal that you've paid into, let's just say, your auto loan. You can just reset that and use that money to put it towards your next car. Number 3, desirable specs and packages to consider. The biggest thing I would say is the overall condition of the car. That's the key, just to see if it was respected, if it was taken care of. But outside of that, these cars don't have anything that you absolutely have to have and stay away from. Porsche, on that hand, I think has more options that you kind of need to stick to. Typically, like if you were to find something that you wanted to keep for multiple years, then you want to find something that has a maximum desirable spec with the least amount of miles for the best price. That's a ratio. That's not like any hard fast rule for any of the three. So it's a combination. Like, let's just say if you're going to find a 2018 M3 CS, let's just say the low mileage examples are like 80,000 because it only has like 5,000 miles on it. You don't need to do that. Just because it has like ultra low miles does not mean that like that's the key to this car ownership. There is a huge premium when a car is less than 10,000 miles or even 15,000 miles. These cars are not collectible cars. Let's be honest. They're mass produced and people desire them because they're reliable and they're reputable for what they offer for that price. So the community, still desires to keep these cars on the road. So that's why the values hold good and they hold strong. And as long as the community is backing it and with enthusiasts who are willing to pay a premium, you're always going to have a generally stable price for these M cars. And that would allow you to use it for that time being and get in and out of it at a very, very good price. So it lowers your ownership expense. So the main packages that are listed on the options list is driver's assistant package, executive package, and the lighting package. You'll see a lot of them pretty much on like a lot of these cars. Most of them are just making the car more comfortable for daily driving, like lane departure and all that. That's all more critical for people who want to daily drive them. For the more performance oriented people, they want like the adaptive suspension, they want the carbon ceramics, and they also want maybe the DCT. There are certain colors that will always demand a premium over other colors. This one is called Frozen Red. This is a BMW individual color. So what that means is BMW has like a swatch of colors that they allow you to paint, but you have to pay extra money for that. And they also have BMW individual interior options. So that means like extended leather. You can get your dash covered in leather, and you can choose different colors of stitching. This one is 101 MSRP. And in 2016, that is pretty absurd for how much this person optioned it. What that does is it raises the desirability of the car because there's 4, I believe, of this specific example of this generation that's a frozen red color. This one is specifically a 1 of 1 because this person did a special commission for interior colors. So you're not gonna see another interior like this. So because it's the outside is 1 of 4, the interior is 1 of 1, this car is actually a 1 of 1 example. When you find stuff like that and you find like, a good mileage and a good price entry, it creates this buffer for you where you have equity in the car. And so let's just say you have $5,000 to $10,000 of equity in the car because you got it at a great price. You have $5,000 to $10,000 to spend to drive up the miles and to use it and enjoy it until that $5,000 to $10,000 is up. And then you can usually get out of it for equal price or maybe even a little bit of profit on top. So if you end up keeping it longer, then that's okay. Just know that now you're going to be dipping below what is going to be your break-even point. So colors. There are standard colors that are offered. There are certain ones that will demand a bigger premium. That's like Austin Yellow, Yasmarina, Secure Orange, Tanzanite Blue, Smoke Topaz, and Champagne Quartz. Those ones typically will demand a premium. Also, some of the ones that I mentioned, like for example, Tanzanite, that's a BMW individual color, but it's like an individual color that's offered at a discount. But those colors are gonna be the ones that are gonna demand the most value. DCT, like I said before, is not a must-have, but it is definitely an option because it opens up your buyer pool. Not everybody can drive manual. If you do care about value retention and you do know how to drive manual, it is definitely not a bad option. I would do that if you're able to. If you're gonna be paying a premium for the manual, on entry, there's really not much of a difference anymore because you're already accounting for that premium. You're essentially spending the money now and then you're going to get it back later. It's the same, it breaks out to the same thing. So if you're able to get a DCT versus a manual with very similar options and a very desirable interior exterior combo, and it's ballpark same price, I would choose the manual instead. But that's pretty much it for desirable options. And common issues, there's really not much for this car. Sometimes, depending on the year, there's some squeaks and rattles in the car, but you can usually find those and then shim it and make it shut up. It's a lot of the rubber gaskets, sometimes it's the rear seats and stuff that like make these like creaking noises. Luckily, this one doesn't have any of that, but some of them do. And then the other big one is actually the crank hub. Crank hubs are known to fail on these cars if you bought a previously like tuned example. So if it was heavily abused and raced or like tuned to like 800 horsepower or 700 horsepower, the life of that motor is probably compromised on stock internals. You can usually pull the data if you need to like look at the ECU and the TCU to see how much power output this was doing. You can look at the dyno charts and everything, and you can tell if it's been heavily modified in the past. It's not easy though. It's something that maybe a tuner would have to help you look at. If you're just doing a pre-purchase inspection, it usually won't come up. So turbo cars, that's the biggest risk. You're looking at cars that could have been heavily tuned, and the crank hub is probably the Achilles heel that everybody considers. In order to reinforce a crank hub, it could be anywhere from $2,500 to $4,500. So it's not the end of the world if you're gonna keep the car. Other than that, most of the things are pretty reliable. Sure, things are gonna break, but it's more like, hey, if you do preventative maintenance, you're gonna be okay. There are certain weak points that all BMWs have, and that's not specific to F80 generation. And that could mean like the charge pipes that are plastic or the intercooler. Some people, they upgrade those because it's a plastic housing. Same with the radiator, they're all plastic. I think one is BMW trying to save cost. Two, it saves weight. The reason why they're not using metal is probably the bean counters don't want the best reliability for your car so that you can come back and buy new cars from them. But second part is weight distribution. BMWs are known to have pretty close or exact 50-50 weight distribution, which is very impressive considering that it's a front engine car. Early generation like E36s all the way to here, their weight distribution has been almost spot on with 50-50. But the compromise is you're gonna have components that fail because plastic is brittle over time and rubber will rot over time. So no matter how you cut it, it's going to wear out at certain mileage, and you just need to account for that. So if you get in something at 40,000 miles versus 90,000 miles, just know that 40,000 miles probably will have things that don't need refreshing immediately versus something that's heavily driven with 90 to 100,000 miles. So that's pretty much it. I hope this helps. This car has been phenomenal for me. I've had it for about a year now, and I've had one back in 2016. I did European delivery, and they're rock solid cars. I never really had a catastrophic failure of any kind ever. I will be starting to use this on track occasionally, just as an occasional track car. I'm not gonna build it out and put a roll cage and boost it and all that stuff. I'm just gonna leave it exactly as is. All I did was tires and wheels. I'm not gonna do pretty much anything else. I'm gonna leave it as a daily driver that I can have the option of taking to the track in case I don't want to tow, and I can be comfortable to and from track. I might not be putting down times that can compete with the GT4 RS or the AMG, but it's something that I can take out for fun and not worry about. This car I got for such a great price that I can probably drive it more than 30,000 miles and be perfectly fine with the exit and break even on that. So these cars are great. Definitely recommend them. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out or comment, and we'll see you guys on the next one.